They always favored my brother Mark. From the moment we were little, it was always about him, his achievements, his charm, his effortless way of making everyone adore him. I was just me, the shadow, the quiet one, the one who worked twice as hard for half the recognition. What if I told you that in just the next few minutes, you'll witness a story of deep-seated resentment blossoming into an obsession for justice, a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about family, loyalty, and the hidden costs of favoritism? This isn't just a tale, it's a raw, unfiltered journey into the heart of betrayal, a story so intense it changed my life forever, and it's about to change how you look at yours. Growing up in our modest suburban home in Ohio, every family gathering felt like a performance where Mark was the star and I was an extra. Look at Mark's straight A's. Mark's leading the football team. Mark got into that Ivy League school. Meanwhile, my accomplishments, no matter how hard won, were met with a polite nod, a faint smile, and a quick change of subject back to Mark. I remember one Christmas, I spent months meticulously crafting a wooden birdhouse for our mother. It was my heart and soul in miniature. Mark, with his usual last-minute flair, bought her a designer scarf. Guess which gift was displayed proudly on the mantelpiece all year? It wasn't the birdhouse. The sting of that memory still burns, a tiny ember of resentment that smoldered for years. Then came the inheritance. Our eccentric Aunt Mildred, a woman I barely knew but who always treated me with a surprising kindness, passed away. Everyone, and I mean everyone, assumed Mark, the golden boy, would get the lion's share. He was already planning his new sports car, I heard him tell our father. I just expected a token amount, perhaps enough for a new set of gardening tools. Instead, the lawyer called me alone, to his downtown Cleveland office. He sat me down, cleared his throat, and with a solemn expression, informed me that Aunt Mildred, in her final act of defiance against our family's skewed affections, had left me everything. Not just a substantial sum, but a fortune. A truly life-altering, generational fortune, tucked away in various trusts and investments, meticulously managed for decades. I was stunned. My hands trembled as I signed the papers. This wasn't just money. It was validation, a silent scream of "I see you" from beyond the grave. For months I kept it a secret. It was my private solace, my quiet triumph. I didn't want the dynamics to change, not yet. I enjoyed the peaceful anonymity, the freedom of knowing I held a power no one suspected. I watched Mark from afar, still basking in his assumed glory, still the center of attention, completely oblivious. The irony was delicious, a secret smirk I carried everywhere. But secrets, especially ones this big, have a way of unraveling. One sweltering summer evening, a casual conversation about property taxes, a slip of the tongue from the lawyer's assistant to a distant cousin, and suddenly, a whisper turned into a roar. Mark, my favored brother, the one who always had everything handed to him, learned my secret. The change in him was immediate, chilling. The easy charm melted away, replaced by a predatory glint in his eyes I'd never seen before. He started calling. Not just once, but incessantly. His tone shifted from casual inquiry to thinly veiled demands. "Hey, little sister, heard you came into some money. Thought you might want to help out your big brother with that new business venture." The requests grew bolder, the hints more direct. He wanted in, not as a partner but as a beneficiary. He saw my fortune as his rightful inheritance, a delayed payment for all his years of being the perfect son. The resentment I'd harbored for so long began to curdle into something far more potent, far more dangerous. This wasn't just about money, it was about respect, about identity, about reclaiming what was truly mine. The game had changed. The quiet shadow was about to step into the light, and Mark had no idea what was coming. You won't believe what he tried to do next, or how I planned to make him pay. Stay with me, because the real story, the one that unravels everything, has just begun. My name is Elias, and for as long as I could remember, I was invisible. Not literally, of course, but that's how it felt growing up in the shadow of my older brother Julian. He was the golden child, the star athlete, the one with the effortless charm and the winning smile. Our parents, bless their hearts, never overtly said they favored him, but their actions screamed it louder than any words. Julian's trophies gleamed on the mantelpiece. His academic achievements were celebrated at every family dinner, and his every whim seemed to be met with immediate enthusiasm. Meanwhile, I was just Elias, the quiet one, the bookish one, the one who preferred the company of code to crowds. Our childhood home in suburban Connecticut, a sprawling colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a stage where Julian always played the lead. I remember one Christmas, I spent weeks meticulously crafting a miniature working robot for my father, a project that consumed my every spare moment. Julian, on the other hand, simply bought a new golf club for Dad the day before. Guess which gift was showcased to every visiting relative? Dad even tried to swing the golf club in the living room, nearly taking out a lamp, while my robot sat forgotten in its box. That sting, that familiar dull ache of being overlooked, became a constant companion for Elias. It wasn't just about gifts or attention. It was about opportunity. When it came time for college, Julian's tuition to a prestigious Ivy League was paid without a second thought. My dream school, a top-tier engineering program with a hefty price tag, was met with furrowed brows and discussions about financial strain. I ended up at a state university, a good school, but not the school, and I worked 3 jobs to cover my expenses. Elias learned early on that if I wanted something, I had to earn it myself, and then some. This fueled a quiet determination within me, a resolve to prove my worth, not to them, but to myself. I swore I would build something so undeniably significant that it couldn't be ignored, something that would finally make Elias visible. After graduation, while Julian coasted into a comfortable marketing job at Dad's firm, I dove headfirst into the cutthroat world of tech startups in Silicon Valley. I worked grueling hours, fueled by instant coffee and a burning ambition. My apartment was a cramped studio in San Jose, a stark contrast to Julian's lavish downtown condo. For years, I toiled away, pouring every ounce of my energy into a revolutionary AI project. It was a complex algorithm designed to predict market trends with unprecedented accuracy, a digital oracle for the financial world. I kept it a secret, even from my family, especially from my family. The idea of them dismissing my life's work, just as they had dismissed everything else, was unbearable. Elias had to protect this, nurture it, let it grow in the dark. The breakthrough came after 5 years of relentless effort. My AI, which I affectionately nicknamed Oracle, began generating astronomical returns on simulated investments. I started with a modest personal sum, a few $1,000s I'd painstakingly saved. Within months it multiplied. Within a year, my small investment had blossomed into a substantial fortune. I was a millionaire, then a multimillionaire, all in secret. The numbers on my offshore accounts grew steadily, a silent testament to my tireless dedication. This wasn't just money, it was validation. It was the tangible proof that Elias was capable, brilliant, and deserving of recognition. I continued to live modestly, maintaining the facade of the struggling tech guy. My parents and Julian still saw me as the slightly awkward, less successful brother, a perception I deliberately fostered. It was a strange sort of power, knowing I held this immense secret while they remained oblivious. This hidden wealth became my armor, my shield against their unconscious dismissals. But it also became a heavy burden, a secret that isolated me further. Elias often wondered if they would ever truly see me, or if my identity was forever linked to Julian's shadow. The central conflict wasn't just about money, it was about recognition, about finally stepping out of that suffocating shadow. My motivation was no longer just to prove myself, but to fundamentally alter the dynamic, to force them to acknowledge the true Elias. The stakes were incredibly high. My entire sense of self, my years of sacrifice, all hinged on this secret. If it were ever exposed prematurely, or worse, stolen, everything I had built, everything Elias was, would crumble. This was my quiet rebellion, a slow-burning fuse waiting for the right moment to ignite. My home, this unassuming apartment in San Jose, held the key to a fortune and a future that no one in my family could ever have imagined. And then, Julian learned my secret. The phone call came on a Tuesday, a day that had, until that moment, been perfectly ordinary. Julian's voice, usually a smooth baritone, was laced with an unfamiliar edge, a sharp, almost predatory curiosity that sent a shiver down my spine. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. Instead, he launched straight into it, a casual question that felt anything but. "So, Elias, I heard you've been doing quite well for yourself. Secret projects, I believe the phrase was." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum solo echoing in the sudden silence of my apartment. How could he possibly know? Who could have told him? A cold sweat pricked my skin. I tried to sound nonchalant, to inject a lightness into my voice that I didn't feel. "Projects? Julian, I'm always working on something. You know me." My attempt at deflection was weak, even to my own ears. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that scraped against my nerves. "Oh, I know you, Elias, better than you think. But these projects, they seem to have a rather substantial price tag attached to them. Enough to buy out a small country, perhaps." The casual cruelty in his tone was unmistakable. He wasn't guessing, he knew. The carefully constructed wall around my life, the one I had spent years building brick by painstaking brick, was crumbling. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. I pictured my apartment, my sanctuary, suddenly exposed, vulnerable. The servers humming quietly in the back room, the intricate network of encrypted data, the algorithms I had poured my life into, all of it suddenly felt like a beacon, drawing unwanted attention. Julian, always the master of psychological warfare, let the silence stretch, allowing my mind to race, to conjure every worst-case scenario. My breath hitched. "What exactly are you talking about, Julian?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. He sighed dramatically, as if my ignorance was an inconvenience. "Don't play coy, little brother. I'm talking about your little empire. The one you've been building in the shadows, while the rest of us thought you were just coding away in some dingy office." The accusation in his voice was a venomous dart. He paused again, savoring the moment, the power he now held over me. "I'm talking about the patent, Elias, the one for that AI-driven financial prediction model, the one that's apparently worth a fortune." The word patent hit me like a physical blow. That was it. That was the key. The one thing I had guarded above all else, the legal document that solidified my ownership, my creation, my freedom. How did he find out? Only a handful of people knew, and they were all bound by ironclad NDAs. A wave of nausea washed over me. Julian continued, his voice dripping with false concern. "You really should have told us, Elias. Family, after all. We could have helped, guided you." The hypocrisy was galling. They had never guided me, never helped me, unless it was for their own benefit. My mind raced, trying to pinpoint the leak. Had one of my former colleagues betrayed me? Was it a hacker? The thought of my life's work, my quiet rebellion, being exposed to the very people I had sought to escape, filled me with a burning rage. Julian, sensing my distress, pressed his advantage. "Mother and father would be so proud, Elias. Imagine, their quiet, bookish son, a tech mogul." Who would have thought? He laughed again, a sound that grated on my ears. It wasn't pride I heard, but thinly veiled envy and a perverse sense of ownership. I clenched my jaw, my knuckles white as I gripped the phone. "What do you want, Julian?" The question was raw, stripped of any pretense. The game was over. He had found me out. Now it was time to face the consequences. His tone shifted then, becoming more serious, more demanding. What do I want? I want what's fair, Elias. What's ours? You think you can just hoard all that wealth? All that success? Without sharing it with your family? The audacity of his words, the sheer entitlement, made my blood boil. He began to lay out his demands, a detailed list of percentages and investments, all designed to funnel a significant portion of my hard-earned fortune into his pockets, and by extension, into our parents' coffers. He spoke of family legacy, of reinvesting in the future, of making things right. Every word was a twisted echo of the excuses they had used to justify Julian's privileged upbringing, their neglect of my own aspirations. He even suggested I should move back home, to be closer to the family, a thinly veiled attempt to gain more control. The resentment that had simmered for years, the quiet ache of being overlooked, now erupted into a searing inferno. This wasn't just about money, it was about control, about validation, about their continued insistence on defining my worth through their lens. My secret fortune, my quiet rebellion, was now their leverage. Julian's discovery wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a declaration of war. He was trying to reclaim the narrative, to force me back into the shadow I had fought so hard to escape. My hands trembled, not from fear but from a burgeoning, dangerous resolve. The game had changed, and I knew with chilling certainty that I would not lose. The phone call from Julian had been a declaration of war, a gauntlet thrown. His smug voice, oozing with false concern, had outlined his terms. Either I funnel a significant portion of my company's profits into his failing ventures, effectively propping up his incompetence, or he would expose my secret fortune to our parents, the very fortune I had built from nothing, the one they dismissed as a childish hobby. It wasn't just about money, it was about control, about forcing me back into the subservient role I'd spent my entire adult life escaping. My hands still trembled with a cold fury, not fear, but a burgeoning, dangerous resolve. The game had changed, and I knew, with chilling certainty, that I would not lose. Julian's audacity was breathtaking. He actually believed he had leverage, that I would crumble under the threat of parental disapproval. He failed to grasp that their approval had never been a currency I valued. Their neglect had forged me, hardened my resolve, and taught me to rely solely on myself. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about proving to Julian and to myself that I was no longer the invisible brother, easily manipulated and dismissed. The initial shock gave way to a calculated anger. I paced my minimalist apartment, the city lights a distant blur outside my panoramic window. My mind raced, dissecting Julian's move, anticipating his next. He was predictable in his greed, always taking the path of least resistance, always seeking the easiest score. This trait, once a source of frustration, now became his greatest vulnerability. I had spent years observing him, studying his flaws, cataloging his weaknesses. Now, I would use them against him. My company, a burgeoning tech firm specializing in secure data solutions, was my sanctuary, my kingdom built on algorithms and relentless effort. It was the antithesis of Julian's flashy, debt-ridden enterprises, which relied on charm and inherited connections rather than genuine innovation. His businesses were houses of cards, ready to collapse at the slightest breath of wind, and I realized, held the hurricane. The next few days were a blur of intense focus. I canceled all non-essential meetings, delegating with precision, and immersed myself in a deep dive into Julian's financial records. It wasn't difficult. His public filings were a mess, a testament to his sloppiness. He had a habit of cutting corners, of obscuring the truth, but for someone with my skill set, those obscurities were glaring neon signs. I uncovered a web of shell corporations, offshore accounts, and highly questionable transactions that painted a picture of outright fraud, not just mismanagement. He wasn't just failing, he was actively deceiving investors, including some very powerful, very unforgiving people. A cold, exhilarating clarity settled over me. This wasn't just about protecting my own interests anymore. This was about dismantling the illusion of Julian's success, about exposing the rotten core beneath his polished exterior. He had always been the golden boy, untouchable, yet here, in the digital labyrinth of his financial misdeeds, he was utterly vulnerable. My initial plan had been defensive, a way to neutralize his threat, but as I delved deeper, a more ambitious, more satisfying strategy began to form. This wouldn't be a mere defense. It would be a counterattack, a surgical strike that would leave him utterly exposed. I envisioned not just his defeat, but his complete and utter undoing. I remembered the countless times Julian had belittled my interests, scoffed at my late nights spent coding, dismissed my passion as a nerdy hobby. He saw my meticulous nature as a weakness, my quiet demeanor as a lack of ambition. He couldn't fathom that the very qualities he scorned were the ones that had allowed me to build an empire. While he squandered his inheritance, he was about to learn a very painful lesson about underestimating the quiet ones. The first step was to discreetly gather irrefutable evidence. I employed a team of forensic accountants, individuals I trusted implicitly, under the guise of an internal audit for a fictitious acquisition. Their task was to meticulously document every single one of Julian's fraudulent activities, every penny siphoned, every lie propagated. I wanted a dossier so airtight, so damning, that no amount of charm or influence could save him. The tension in my chest was a constant thrum, a mix of anticipation and a strange, almost perverse joy. I was meticulously crafting Julian's downfall, brick by painstaking brick. It felt like I was finally taking control of the narrative, not just for my own life, but for the entire family dynamic that had always favored him. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about rebalancing a deeply skewed scale. One evening, as I reviewed a particularly egregious example of Julian's financial malfeasance, a scheme to defraud elderly investors out of their retirement savings, a wave of cold fury washed over me. This wasn't just a brotherly squabble anymore. This was a moral imperative. He wasn't just a spoiled golden boy, he was a predator. I closed my laptop, the screen reflecting my grim expression. The city lights outside seemed to mock Julian's impending darkness. He had threatened to expose my secret fortune. He had no idea I was about to expose his secret shame. The quiet, bookish brother was about to unleash a storm he wouldn't see coming. And when it hit, it would shatter his carefully constructed world into a million pieces. The resentment that had simmered for decades was finally boiling over, morphing into an obsession with justice. Julian had made his move, now it was my turn, and my move would be decisive. The moment of truth arrived with a sickening lurch in my stomach, a feeling I hadn't experienced since confronting Julian about his Ivy League tuition. I had spent weeks meticulously gathering every shred of evidence, every damning detail that painted a picture of his deceit. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the principle, about the years of being overlooked, of being told I wasn't enough, while Julian effortlessly reaped rewards he hadn't earned. My plan was simple, elegant, and utterly devastating. It centered around the one thing Julian valued above all else, his carefully constructed image, his reputation as the successful golden son. I scheduled a family dinner, ostensibly to celebrate my own recent, very real career achievement. My parents, predictably, were thrilled. Julian, ever the condescending older brother, offered a perfunctory congratulations, his eyes already glazing over with boredom. He couldn't fathom that I, Elias, could achieve anything truly noteworthy without his perceived guidance. The irony was almost too sweet. I watched him across the polished dining table, the same table where his academic triumphs had been lauded, where his athletic awards had been displayed. Tonight, it would be the stage for his undoing. The conversation flowed easily at first, a superficial dance of pleasantries and updates. Julian regaled everyone with tales of his latest innovative business venture, a vague endeavor that always seemed to involve a lot of buzzwords and very little tangible output. My parents nodded along, their faces alight with pride. This was my cue. I cleared my throat, the sound surprisingly loud in the otherwise convivial atmosphere. All eyes turned to me, a flicker of surprise on Julian's face. He wasn't used to me commanding attention. "Julian," I began, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands beneath the table. "That's a fascinating venture you're pursuing. It reminds me a lot of the disruptive tech solutions company you started back in college, the one that mysteriously folded after a few months." A subtle shift in the air, a momentary pause in my mother's cheerful chatter. Julian's smile faltered, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. "Elias, what are you talking about? That was years ago. And it wasn't a failure, it was a learning experience. A learning experience that involved a significant investment from Dad. If I recall correctly, I pressed on, my gaze unwavering." My father, who had been about to take a sip of wine, lowered his glass slowly. My mother looked from me to Julian, a faint line appearing between her brows. "Elias, that's enough," Julian snapped, his voice losing its easy charm. "We don't need to rehash old history." "Oh, but I think we do," I countered, my voice gaining strength. "Because it seems to be a pattern, doesn't it, Julian? A pattern of grand promises and spectacular collapses, always leaving others to pick up the pieces. Like the revolutionary app you developed last year, the one you pitched to investors as your own brainchild." My parents exchanged worried glances. Julian's face was now a mask of barely controlled fury. "Elias, I don't know what you're trying to do, but this is completely out of line. Is it, Julian?" I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, yet loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. "Because I have a copy of the original patent application for that revolutionary app, and guess whose name is listed as the sole inventor? Not yours, Julian. It's a former colleague of yours, a brilliant young coder who you conveniently forgot to credit." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father's jaw was clenched, his eyes fixed on Julian. Julian himself was pale, his bravado completely gone, replaced by a raw, exposed panic. He looked like a cornered animal, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "That's a lie," he finally choked out, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" I reached into my jacket pocket, pulling out a crisp, folded document. "Because I also have the signed affidavit from your former colleague, detailing how you presented his work as your own, how you systematically cut him out of the project, and how you tried to intimidate him into silence." I laid the document gently on the table, pushing it towards my father. He was too scared to go public, Julian. But he confided in me. He knew I'd understand what it felt like to be overshadowed, to have your efforts dismissed. My father picked up the affidavit, his hands trembling slightly as he unfolded it. He began to read, his face growing grimmer with each line. My mother, tears welling in her eyes, stared at Julian as if seeing him for the first time. The golden child, the perfect son, was crumbling before their very eyes. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with years of suppressed resentment finally bursting forth. This was just the beginning. The foundation of Julian's carefully constructed life was about to be obliterated, and I, the invisible brother, was holding the detonator. The silence that followed my revelation was deafening, a vacuum sucking all the air from the room. My parents, who had always seemed so composed, so unshakable in their conviction of Julian's perfection, now looked utterly lost. Their faces, usually etched with pride whenever Julian was mentioned, were contorted in a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. Julian, for his part, was a portrait of sputtering rage, his face a mottled red. He tried to interrupt, to deny, to deflect, but his words caught in his throat, choked by the sheer weight of the truth I had just unleashed. I watched him, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. This wasn't just about the money, or the inheritance, or even the years of being overlooked. This was about finally leveling the playing field, about forcing them all to see what I had seen my entire life. I saw the moment of realization flicker in my mother's eyes, a dawning comprehension of the carefully constructed facade Julian had maintained. My father, usually so quick to defend his golden boy, remained uncharacteristically silent, his gaze fixed on Julian with an intensity I had never witnessed. "You think this is just about money, Julian?" I finally said, my voice cutting through the thick tension. "This is about every single time you took credit for my ideas. Every single time you belittled my achievements. Every single time our parents chose you, without question, without hesitation, while I scraped and fought for every single thing I ever wanted." Julian's eyes, usually so confident, now darted around the room, searching for an escape, for a way to regain control. He was a cornered animal, and the illusion of his invincibility was shattering with every passing second. He tried to appeal to our parents, a desperate plea for validation, for their usual unquestioning support. But they were looking at him differently now. The blind adoration had been replaced by a chilling skepticism. "Elias, what are you saying?" my mother whispered, her voice barely audible. "Julian, is this true?" Julian stammered, a pathetic string of excuses and accusations. He blamed me, of course, for being jealous, for fabricating stories, for trying to tear the family apart. But the detailed evidence I had presented, the undeniable paper trail, the explicit communications I had intercepted, spoke volumes louder than his desperate lies. I had spent months, years even, meticulously gathering every scrap of proof, every single instance of his deceit. I had learned from his mistakes, from his arrogance. While he was busy basking in the limelight, I was in the shadows, meticulously dismantling his pedestal. The climax wasn't a sudden explosion, but a slow, agonizing implosion. Julian's carefully cultivated image, the one our parents had so readily bought into, was disintegrating before their eyes. I saw the shame, the profound disappointment wash over my parents. It wasn't the anger I had expected, but a deeper, more painful realization of their own complicity, their own blindness. That was the true sting, the real victory. They weren't just seeing Julian for who he was. They were seeing themselves, and their role in creating him. "I didn't want to do this," I lied, my voice steady, betraying none of the satisfaction that coursed through me. "But you left me no choice, Julian. You pushed me too far. You always thought you were untouchable, didn't you? That your charm, your golden boy status, would always protect you." Julian lunged at me then, a desperate, animalistic cry escaping his lips. But my father, finally stirred from his stunned silence, stepped in between us, his hand firmly on Julian's chest. The look in my father's eyes was not one of protection, but of profound disappointment, a deep sorrow that resonated through the room. It was the look of a man whose idol had just fallen, shattered into a million pieces. My mother started to cry, soft, racking sobs that tore at the fabric of the carefully constructed family facade. It wasn't for Julian, I realized with a jolt. Not entirely. It was for the loss of the perfect family they believed they had, for the illusion that had been so cruelly exposed. The golden glow around Julian had vanished, replaced by the stark, unflattering light of truth. The repercussions were swift and brutal. The company, once Julian's domain, launched an internal investigation. My evidence was irrefutable. His career, built on a foundation of sand, crumbled almost immediately. The investors, once so eager to back the brilliant Julian, pulled their funding. His reputation, once spotless, was now irrevocably tarnished. The whispers started, then grew into a roar, echoing through the industry. The golden boy was a fraud. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a quiet observer. There was no grand celebration, no triumphant dance, just a quiet, profound sense of closure. The bitterness, The resentment that had simmered within me for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a strange, almost melancholic peace. The detonator had been pushed, the explosion had happened, and the dust was finally beginning to settle. The invisible brother was invisible no more, but the cost of visibility had been high. The quiet peace I'd found in the aftermath of that detonation was a fragile thing, I quickly discovered. It wasn't a triumphant peace, but a heavy, almost somber one. The silence in my life, once filled with the clanging gears of my ambition and the gnawing ache of resentment, now felt hollow. My brother Julian had been stripped bare, his carefully constructed facade shattered, and with it, a part of my own identity had crumbled too. For so long my purpose had been defined by him, by the shadow he cast, and the desperate need to step out of it. Now that shadow was gone, and I was left standing in an unfamiliar, blinding light. My parents, surprisingly, were the first to reach out, not with anger, not with accusations, but with a bewildered, almost mournful silence. A phone call from my mother, her voice thin and reedy, asking if I was all right. It was a question she hadn't asked in years, not genuinely, not with that tremor of concern. I told her I was fine, a lie that tasted like ash, but I couldn't bring myself to unpack the complex tapestry of emotions that had led me to this point. I couldn't tell her that in destroying Julian, I had also, in a way, destroyed a part of myself. The golden child, my brother Julian, had been their entire world, and I had been the one to reveal the cracks in that gilded cage. Julian, true to his nature, vanished. He sold his lavish house, liquidated his assets, and disappeared from the social circles he once dominated. The gossip columns, initially feasting on his downfall, eventually moved on to newer, shinier scandals. His name, once synonymous with success and privilege, became a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he'd moved to a small town in the Midwest, far from the glare of the East Coast elite, attempting to rebuild his life in anonymity. The idea of Julian, the quintessential city slicker, trying to blend into a quiet, unassuming existence, almost made me smile. Almost. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had yearned for visibility, for recognition, and in the end, I had achieved it, but not in the way I had ever envisioned. My name, Elias, was now linked to the scandal, to the exposure of Julian's deceit. Some saw me as a hero, a whistleblower who brought down a corrupt empire. Others saw me as a vengeful brother, consumed by envy. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in between, a murky gray area I was still navigating. One evening, months after the dust had settled, I found myself staring at the miniature robot I had built for my father that Christmas so long ago. It sat on my bookshelf, a relic from a past I had desperately tried to escape. I picked it up, its tiny gears still whirring faintly as I pressed a hidden button. It was a simple toy, a testament to a child's earnest desire for affection, for a moment of shared joy. The memory of my father nearly swinging a golf club through a lamp, while my creation sat ignored, still pricked. But the sharp sting was gone, replaced by a dull ache of understanding. My father, surprisingly, had sought me out. He'd come to my apartment, a rare and unexpected visit, his face etched with a weariness I'd never seen before. He didn't speak of Julian, not directly. Instead, he spoke of his own regrets, of choices made and opportunities missed. He spoke of the pressures he'd felt, the expectations of his own upbringing, and how he'd inadvertently perpetuated a cycle of favoritism. He didn't apologize for Julian, but he apologized for his own blindness, for not seeing me, truly seeing me, for all those years. It wasn't an absolution, not entirely. But it was a beginning. A fragile thread, perhaps, but a thread nonetheless. The wealth I had amassed, the fortune I had so meticulously built, now felt different. It was no longer a weapon, no longer a shield. It was simply mine. I started investing in projects that truly interested me, supporting young engineers and innovators who reminded me of my younger self. the one who built robots in his bedroom. I found a new purpose, a different kind of ambition, one driven by creation rather than retribution. The wound from my childhood, the deep-seated resentment that had fueled my every move, had begun to scar over. It was still there, a faint, undeniable mark. But it no longer throbbed with every beat of my heart. The bitterness had faded, replaced by a quiet wisdom. I had learned that true visibility wasn't about tearing down others, but about building up oneself, authentically and unapologetically. My brother Julian had taught me that, in his own twisted way, and for that, perhaps, I could finally find a different kind of peace. Not the peace of victory, but the peace of understanding. The peace of having finally stepped out of the shadow, not by destroying it, but by finding my own light. The air in the courtroom felt heavy, thick with unspoken accusations and years of simmering resentment. My brother Michael sat across the aisle, his face a mask of disbelief and anger. He still couldn't grasp how his carefully constructed world had crumbled around him. The judge's gavel striking the wood echoed like a final judgment, not just for the legal proceedings, but for our entire fractured family history. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Julian Thorne, the judge declared, his voice cutting through the tension. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Michael's jaw dropped, his eyes, usually so arrogant, now wide with a dawning horror. He looked at me, a silent plea in their depths, but I offered nothing. Years of being overlooked, of being the invisible brother, had hardened me. This wasn't just about money. It was about finally being seen, finally being acknowledged. The legal battle had been brutal, a public airing of all our family's dirty laundry. Every slight, every favoritism, every time Michael had used his charm and our parents' blindness to his advantage, it all came out. The evidence I'd meticulously gathered, the financial discrepancies, the forged documents, it painted a damning picture. Our parents, who had initially sided with Michael, were now silent, their faces etched with a profound sadness that was almost as painful to witness as Michael's downfall. They saw, perhaps for the first time, the true cost of their preferential treatment. Walking out of the courthouse, the paparazzi swarmed, their flashes blinding, their questions a cacophony. Michael, usually so adept at charming the media, was shell-shocked. He stumbled, a shadow of his former self. I watched him, devoid of pity. The fortune he'd squandered, the inheritance he'd believed was solely his, was now largely mine, legally so. The irony was palpable. He'd always considered me the less ambitious, the less capable brother. Now his ambition had been his undoing. A few weeks later I received a call. It was Michael. His voice, usually so confident, was hoarse, defeated. He wanted to meet. I agreed, curious despite myself. We met at a quiet cafe, a neutral territory far from our childhood haunts. He looked gaunt, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame. The swagger was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. "Julian," he began, his voice barely a whisper, I was wrong, about everything." His words, so simple yet so profound, hit me harder than any courtroom victory. He confessed to the years of manipulation, the lies, the way he'd subtly undermined me to our parents. He admitted to the jealousy, the fear that I might one day surpass him. It was a raw, unfiltered confession, stripped of all his usual bravado. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was simply stating the truth, finally. I listened, my own heart a complex mix of anger, vindication, and a strange, unexpected flicker of empathy. The revenge I had meticulously planned, the justice I had so desperately sought, felt different now. It wasn't the triumphant roar I'd envisioned, but a quiet, almost melancholic understanding. He had lost everything, not just the money, but his carefully constructed identity, his place in the family. "What happens now, Michael?" I asked, my voice calm, steady. He looked at me, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I don't know, Julian." I truly don't know. I didn't offer him a lifeline, not yet. He needed to find his own way, to truly face the consequences of his actions. But as I left the cafe, a sense of quiet closure settled over me. The resentment, the betrayal, the obsession, they were still there, echoes in the chambers of my heart, but they no longer consumed me. The victory wasn't in his downfall, but in my own liberation. I had found my voice, asserted my worth, and in doing so, had finally stepped out of his shadow, not as a lesser brother, but as my own man. The fortune was a tangible reward, but the true prize was the quiet, hard-won peace within myself. It was bittersweet, yes, but it was mine.